Now I think I'm recording.
Me too. I think I'm recording as well. And 1, 2, 3.
What, is this happening? This isn't happening yet.
Beep 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 beep. Joe Rogan. I'm Ryan.
Yeah, you are.
The longest fucking delays ever.
That
I'm
one was on purpose.
Ryan.
I'm Harland, and we're
This
the
is
Dawdler's Philosophy.
this is the Dawdler's Philosophy podcast. God, no. And we're back to discuss more interesting things to brighten up all zero listeners' lives. Our number one fan is with us and cheering us on the whole time, just being like, "Oh, you're the best." And yeah, this is what Dawdlers do. Tonight's topic, I'm just going to say it in one word, and that word is emergence. And it's a topic that Harland and I have discussed on many occasions. And I think sometimes we have fun with it, and other times we're like, oh, fuck, this conversation again. But it keeps coming back. It doesn't really keep coming. It's not like there's like new information on emergence tonight. You know, like breaking emergence news, but nonetheless, we still keep going back to it. Like it's like a comforting blanket at this point. We're just like, send me to sleep, emergence. And of course, it's ugly brother reductionism, who, it's when you're ugly, I don't know. There's nothing I can do to help it.
That's how we do it in this new media, right? You're supposed to just state your biases right out front, and then it's okay.
Yeah, basically. But that's okay, because I'm not the one who's going to be providing, let's just say, the greatest amount of insight tonight. I'm not supposed to say that either. But that's my way. I just kind of like, oh, chips on the table. I'm like, I'm betting it all. I know that there's a 10 of hearts in that down card. Whatever. I don't know card lingo. So, Harland.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, so it's a comforting blanket, and we don't know why we keep going back to it. I somewhat think I'm surprised by how little airtime this topic gets in general, because it seems to me like a pretty big deal. At it being a metaphysical thesis that affects everything we deal with in daily life, and almost all, every what they call special science. I don't know, it seems like a big issue to me. Not enough people spend enough time on it. Such that I don't even know.
I would agree.
When you like announce at the top, I'm going to give you a one-word topic for the night: emergence. What percent of a crowd? Well, I guess it would be 0 of 0, but of even intelligent listeners, such as would click on this podcast, would even know, or to what extent they would know what we meant or what we're talking about. So I guess we'll have to enlighten them.
Sheeple. Yeah, I think I don't know. I don't know. That's a thought that I've never had. I'm never like, I wonder what other people think of emergence. I've just always just been like, I think of emergence, and sometimes in certain circumstances, like those that you and I have engaged in, discussion-wise, I've been like, yeah, let's talk about this thing. It's a weird one, though, in that respect, in that I guess it's a lonely one, but it's one we visit quite often. I think we visit it often. Even in jest,
Yeah.
like when we joke, when we're with friends and we're like, what are we talking about this time? And everyone's like, emergence, or whatever. Or determinism. Those are
It's
these
definitely
like...
become one of those words that in a crowd we say in italics. So well, I'll just start by throwing out the Stanford Encyclopedia definition, or what they say near the beginning of their article on emergence.
Okay.
We might roughly characterize the shared meaning, because there have been a variety of accounts over time. We might roughly characterize the shared meaning thus: emergent entities, properties or substances, quote unquote, arise out of more fundamental entities, and yet are novel or irreducible with respect to them being these fundamental entities. Emergent entities arise out of more fundamental ones, and yet are somehow novel or irreducible to the fundament. And then, you get the classic examples, and these things probably most people have heard of, are like traffic jam. Right? Is there anything, is it just the cars, or is there a phenomenon, do we need to include traffic, or the wetness of water, right? Or something having a temperature instead of just the molecular kinetic energy or whatever.
Yeah.
I tend to think that other people think. Like, I think some folk version of emergence is the natural position, the non-theoretical position. Regular folk live in their regular life, believe in traffic and swimming pools and cars and tables, and they believe in all of these large level things, not merely whatever the physics of the day says is the fundament, the substance, the unsplittable particles, the whatever the physicists say. But as with most folk theories, I don't know that it can hold up very well to reductionist attack, right? That when Steven Weinberg or whoever it is comes around and says, well, maybe there is no such thing really as a glass of water. There's just all these atoms or subatomic particles or fields or whatever their favorite story is nowadays. And if I can tell the entire story of the unfolding of cause in the universe without ever referencing these higher level entities, then maybe we just shouldn't believe in them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. Do you want me to go on, or do you want to continue yourself? I don't want to interrupt, that's all.
Well, you couldn't. Any contribution, it's never an interruption. It's just valuable.
I know, but when you talk about those things, it does make me think of stuff, and I don't want to derail anything at the moment, that's all.
Okay, well, I'll push forward slightly more, and then you can go back and say your cue.
Yeah, I mean, we can always revisit. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Continue.
The term emergence came about, I guess, somewhere in the mid-1800s, and then was the first big name that talked about it was, I guess, John Stuart Mill, and then with hindsight, in 2018, looking back and talking about the history of the term emergence in the literature, everyone talks about these early British emergentists in the early 1900s. Lloyd Alexander, Morgan, and the C.D. Broad guy. They all had slightly different versions of it. I just wanted to start with a quote from Broad about the alternative. Because I think in order to get into whatever we ought to call this more sophisticated version of emergence rather than just the folk version, that we kind of have to go through the challenge of the mereological nihilists, of the arch reductionists, who want to say, nope, it's all just atoms following laws. So here's Broad's version of that position. There is one and only one kind of material. Each particle of this obeys one elementary law of behavior and continues to do so, no matter how complex may be the collection of particles of which it is a constituent. There is one uniform law of composition connecting the behavior of groups of these particles. All the apparently different kinds of stuff are just differently arranged groups of different numbers of the one kind of elementary particle, and all the apparently peculiar laws of behavior are simply special cases which could be deduced in theory from the structure of the whole under consideration. For me, that works pretty well to specify the kind of Laplacian or Democritean position of that there's just atoms and whatever laws that the atoms obey. Everything that you think there is, cups and tables and ducks and shotguns and whatever, is all just combinations of atoms, but there's nothing new under the sun. You know, it's still just atoms following laws. And so that if we want to develop a version of emergence that would be considered scientifically respectable, we're going to have to come up with one that accepts and addresses that challenge, I think. And maybe that's just me, I don't know. But I went through a phase of being oriented in that direction, of just saying, yeah, none of this stuff exists. It's all just an illusion or a convenient fiction. And we need to be really hard and materialist and physicalist, and it's just atoms, and that's better. I have since been wanting to come out the other side of that into a developed version of an emergentist worldview, but I want it to be one that respects the force of the reductionist challenge.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really nice way to put it, because clearly the running rivalry is between a reductionist approach to say that all it is just atoms, and then sort of the emergentist approach, which is to say, hey, we got some extra entities up at the top here that are doing their own thing, and then they do things with other things, and so on and so forth. And of course, there's also, I guess, this sort of apologist who tries to do both and compromises or compatibilizes or whatever with the supervenience stuff, which basically just says whatever it is that's happening at a higher level, is, whatever's going on, it's definitely comprised of the smaller stuff below it. And I don't know if they collapse it down to just the fundament always. But anyway, I don't know. The thing that I was having an issue with the reductionist types of claims that it's just all atoms or whatever, is just that there's, from the physicist's point of view, I think that could be very well a position to take, a good one. All that the physicist tends to be focusing on, I think all that information is available to them to maybe draw those types of conclusions. But then if you look at other sciences, like other, let's just say cognitive sciences, there also seems to be quite a few other types of phenomena that suggest that there is a hierarchical arrangement in the way that we talk, in the way that we make tools, in the way that we do things. Just it's an operation that we possess that is, oriented certainly by neurological networks, but also the circuits, etc. And that I have thought at times, like, what if that's the starting point, and then from there, the way that we are as biological organisms, specifically our lineage, with our ability to talk and it being hierarchically arranged potentially, and the way that we make tools and that being hierarchically arranged, and maybe even just sort of the way we think by embedding thing into thing into thing, that gives us the story of the reductionist. That gives us the reductionist story that we then can say, if we extrapolate from the reductionist point of view, then we can say it's all just atoms. But what if we began someplace else at a point where maybe there's, I don't know, maybe there's a way that we think, in the way that we use words and language and symbols, etc., that overrides even that, because we require that to tell the story of the reductionist claims. And it is that which also possesses these other kinds of properties, these hierarchical arrangements that, I don't know, it's just always been kind of an issue for me, having learned some more about cognitive science, to then say, oh, well, it's all just reductionist, as if that would be the thing that gave us the way to peer into what's going on. I think just as many people are peering into what's going on into the, how language is constructed, and how, how other things are constructed, our technology and stuff like that. Anyway.
What I'm hearing in that, and maybe, I don't know if this is where you were going or not, is what they call methodological reductionism. That a recent example of that stuck in my mind is the whole E.O. Wilson consilience program, that every time we can, we being scientists, I guess, whatever that means, reduce a quote-unquote higher level research program to a lower, we do it. We seem to get higher degrees of confidence when we do so, more complete causal etiologies of events, more experimental agreement and replication success, etc. When we can take, and this is one of the things that these early reductionists were concerned with. This was back in the days when there was, vitalists and entelechies and all of this stuff, because biology was new and complicated. Now it's not complicated anymore, right?
Yeah.
And they were saying, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could reduce biology to chemistry to physics, etc.? And that, right, I think, still is a tendency we want to do. Can we reduce psychology to cognitive science to neurology to biology to chemistry to physics? Can we knock everything down all the way? And if so, we should try to, for all the other theoretical and practical virtues that accrue from anchoring things in our most fundamental theories.
But if reductionism, the way you described it, is to be a challenge, my thinking is, well, is the hurdle that it has to get over as well is to say, and maybe you can do this for me right now, I don't know, but the idea of breaking things down and building them up by joining them or whatever, to me, that seems like, how can we say that doesn't say more about us than the universe and all that kind of stuff? Like, could that just be us and our bias in everything, and wherever we go, we find things that we can break down and build up, and so therefore, yes, it is, if we just keep breaking down, we'll eventually find the bottom, and then that will be the fundament that builds everything else, and we can then say, oh, it's just that, But then, of course, that never seems to be the case even in physics. They keep finding other things that, and is that saying more about us than it is about the universe? And that's where I didn't want to derail us, because that might be a separate conversation then, or one that we can have later on tonight. Once we've had other parts of the discussion. That's all. So that's why I was hesitant. But it still like rose up in me, and I couldn't help it. Like, you know, chirp up or whatever the fucking phrases that I want to use.
Okay, right. The question, is it us or is it the universe?
Right.
Huge question in itself, and has been a major division in the history of the literature of emergence reduction debate. I don't know if it's been always, but definitely the one that's ascendant now is a version of an it's us, I think, or that's how I read it, picture. Emergentists typically are broken into two major camps, the epistemological emergentist and the ontological emergentist. And the epistemological emergentists refer to the way to create a new level. Like, I mean, if we're going to talk in level terms, is that fine? That makes sense? Is that fine? Like,
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
A level of description, and then those kind of accord with the special sciences, and that has mapped decently to the way our academic institutions have developed. We make new sciences, new journals or whatever, that deal with questions on all these different levels. Mm-hmm. So when I'm breaking these emergentists into two camps, it's kind of how do we establish a new level? So for the epistemological emergentist, a new level is warranted, apt. We are willing to countenance a level here if the goings-on at said level, quote, cannot be predicted from, unquote, facts on level 0, or whatever. Level 1 is a distinct level on which there are emergent entities or properties if either we can't or it can't, as though there were a difference there. Sometimes people want to talk about it could not be done, even in theory, that a prediction could be made. I'm, of course, as a skeptic and kind of hostile to those kind of moves. I don't know what gives you the right to say what can or can't be done rather than point out a limitation in yourself. I can't figure out how to. But so if I can't predict what goes on in the world of duck hunting with the tools on the level of quantum physics, then maybe this biological level gets its ontological credentials. So that's the epistemological ones. Can't be predicted. And that seems to be the more popular, a larger population in 2018. The other camp is the ontological emergence camp, and they talk about what are maybe more vague and difficult to establish criteria, such as novelty or downward causal powers, right? So that they don't really care whether or not human theorists or hypothetical superhuman theorists can or can't predict what's going to happen. To me, this is a stronger claim. They're saying, nope, it is a genuinely novel property in the universe. It was not around at time 0, and at time 2, it is. At one point, there were no ducks, and now there are, or whatever, And that there's just something genuinely new that arose. And then one of the ways, maybe the most popular way, of trying to establish, well, how do you know if there's something new or whatever, is if there's reason to suspect that these higher level entities have a causal influence on things at a lower level. This thing that they call downward causation. That would be, I think, a reason to claim, oh, okay, well then this property is both real and new. I don't know if that makes sense yet. It's kind of a tough one.
I mean, I think I follow. But there's something about the fogginess of novelty. I like downward causation a little bit more because it seems more tractable an idea. Novelty, like we've had this discussion before, where I think that in some senses I've described things as being novel, maybe from an epistemological emergence perspective, and you were like, no, that's not novel. And then, so you must have been pulling from this ontological one, which is like, that, like some of the first organisms or whatever that ever existed or something could be new or whatever, like a very different way that, materials can, interact and be arranged and stuff like that, greater than whatever the basic chemistry, principles of chemistry are, or something like that. And so, I don't know. So that's the part that I guess I would be confused about is the novelty aspect. I don't know if we can set that aside for now and continue on, or if we need to address novelty now, but I am confused about what we then define as novel, in either camp, epistemological emergence or ontological emergence.
I want to address that by totally stepping in it. I'm gonna say something that I think is totally irresponsible and inaccurate and anachronistic, but that hopefully gets this lesson across. So let's pretend we are in a Big Bang universe that was initiated by God or whatever. First cause type thing where we don't even talk about what happened before it. We don't talk about what made it happen, whatever. But empty universe and then a pop, and now we've got some stuff. Now this, I assume, is physically ignorant, but I'm going to just try. So right after, at 1 second after the Big Bang, let's say, there's no such thing as solidity in that universe, in that there are no two distinct entities which, were they put on a collision course, would, arrive and deflect or something. They wouldn't bounce off. You wouldn't be able to knock on anything. It's just plasmas or whatever, and there's just nothing like that. But allow that universe to evolve for X amount of time, and shit happens. Hand wave, and later, a year later, now have evolved, developed, or whatever, some chunks of stuff, such as we would be able to, analogous to rocks or whatever, that as they float around, if they come into close space-time coordinates or whatever, they bounce off, and there's some kind of deflection, and they have a causal influence on each other in that their trajectories are altered by them coming into quote unquote contact, right?
There's heat and light.
So now solidity has emerged in that universe. At minute X, there were no interactions that occurred that matched that description of the evolution of the state of the system. And then at a later time, in order to describe the way that the state of the system evolves, we have to take into account things bouncing off each other, so that and let's call that solidity. So now solidity emerged in that universe. I don't know if that helped at all.
Well, no, it helps. I just don't. I just have to like.
And I wasn't even supposed to be defining emergence there. I was supposed to be getting to novelty or whatever. So at one point, there were the first two rocks that bounced off each other, right?
Right.
Or the first one that counterfactually had the properties such that if it were to be on a collision course, it would bounce, whatever. As soon as that happened, that would be the novel emergence of a new property, solidity, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. No, that's totally. That's totally fine. I'm I don't know how to describe it other than being like an asshole is, I want to say, and I shouldn't, because I want to just keep having this conversation, and I'm not, I don't know, I'm just being too much of an epistemological emergentist. I don't know, but I want to be like, so says English, 2018 and all that kind of crap. Like, so says the story we have about these things, and what are those stories made up of? I don't know if I'm just being an idiot here. I guess I must be, but so that's kind of I keep kind of going back to like is it us or is it the universe? Is the universe this nice story we tell because we're clever and we come up with ways to kind of play with it or whatever, and then from there we can draw certain kinds of conclusions. And of course we love to tell stories around the campfire about the gods and blah blah blah. So we tell these big stories about the Big Bang, and then the really smart people come along and they start, kind of putting a framework around these things that's a little more abstract, and they start talking about reductionism and emergence and stuff like that. And I'm just like, how much of this is us and how much of this is something, the ontological emergentist, I kind of have, in some ways, a lot of sympathy for, because to me, it's like, well, you're really buying in. You're just like, okay, to keep doing, poker or whatever analogies, which I'm not very good at playing poker, but it's like the whole, all my chips are in, like, let's do this. Like, let's just go all the way and try and like understand how it's possible, and all that. But there's just this goddamn stupid epistemological devil on my shoulder just being like about like us and what we do and how we do it. And I kind of want to get away. I want to back away from that because I want to have a good conversation. I don't want to have one of those ones where I'm like shutting it down because I think that's not addressed by any of these points or something. Or I'm not, I don't know. I have this negative feeling about what I'm saying too. So that's interesting. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, I tend that way in many conversations to pay attention to the cultural relativism, linguistic relativism, all these things we're saying in English, and so now we got to go talk to Chomsky instead of Broad. But for the purpose of certain conversations, we kind of have to skip over that, right?
Yeah, no, we do, and I do have a way to kind of tie it in a bow maybe later. Maybe. So let's keep going. Let's leave Chomsky on what's it, Democracy Now! Let him sit in that chair to talk about politics and things that you don't know about that are happening, and how shame on you. And let's go to Broad and Campbell and others.
Everything of that form, and I don't know which one was first, but whether it's whoever has that Enlightenment Now or Democracy Now or whatever, to me it's all just Serenity Now! I don't know which one was first, but that's all I can hear.
I just remember, fucking Seinfeld too.
Seinfeld.
Oh, Jesus. Good stuff.
So this philosopher Robert Van Gulik has another useful, in my opinion, rubric that we can put on this. He has 3 grades of emergence. called one specific value emergence, and that is like aggregation. What's his example? Say a bronze statue has a mass of 1 kilogram, whereas none of its parts, as though they all have mass, none of them have the same mass. Right? So those are basic, like you just add it up. Every part has some, but none have the precise value. So that's his baseline. You know, whether we would even argue whether that even ought to be called emergence at all. So then you can move up from that to what he calls modest kind emergence. The whole has features that are different in kind from those of its parts, like color, right? A piece of cloth may be purple in hue, though none of its molecules does it even apply or make sense to say are purple. And then you have number 3, radical kind emergence. And of course, I like this one immediately. The emergent property is different in kind from those had by its parts and is of a kind whose nature and existence is not necessitated by features of its parts, their mode of combination, or the law-like regularities governing the features. So that one goes beyond, and I think he phrased it this way for this purpose, goes beyond what they call supervenience, which you mentioned earlier, and one cannot, unfortunately, have a discussion of emergence without talking about, because it had a heyday, and I don't know if it's still going on, but philosophers became very enamored with this term supervenience for a while. The technical definition of supervenience is as follows. Feel free to zone out. If property M emerges from properties of the set N1 through Nn, then M supervenes on that set. The systems are alike in respective basal conditions. N1 through Nn must all be alike in respect of their emergent properties. The point, I think it's just a point about necessity, and again, as people will get used to hearing these things from me, I refuse to talk about necessity. I don't think anyone is ever warranted to do so. But supervenience is the claim that any and every time you bring the basal conditions about, where every time you take atoms of this type and arrange them in this order, then you will see the illusion or appearance of a higher level property. Well, I guess I'm cheating again and bringing in my own. To me, that would make it illusory. If there was some law about it, that every time you have atoms arranged thusly, you see traffic jam, wetness, whatever these higher level properties are supposed to be, then those higher level ones supervene on the basal conditions.
Well, hold on. But I think the whole thing with supervenience is that it would be willing to admit that there is some higher level properties, but that there is like that the lower levels are not dependent in any way upon higher level properties at all. So the higher levels always just spring forth from the lower levels. If you were to say, okay, yeah, sure, there's wetness or whatever, but wetness is because there's a certain temperature and pressure with high, H2O and all that kind of stuff. With you have a certain number of them, and that's where you get water and wetness. That brings in this whole fucking brain shit again. But you get water, whatever the properties of water are. It's a liquid or something, and that of course also brings in the goddamn brain shit. Anyway, but doesn't matter.
What it brings in...
I'm like, help!
This isn't going to help, but this is going to, in my opinion, make matters worse. But what it also brings in is the colossal problem of the ceteris paribus. Even as you were telling it, you were like, well, yeah, you'll see wetness if it's the right temperature and pressure and blah, blah. And you've got this huge indefinite disjunction of, well, you'll see it unless, and that's another problem with necessity claims and supervenience, in my opinion. But anyway,
I think
that's
they're
a
just trying
big
to.
deal.
Any supervenience claims are trying to make some kind of dependency claim. I feel like, that these things depend upon these other ones at a lower level, and that's all they're trying to do is just
Uh,
keep it discrete, right? They're trying to remain discrete at the different levels so that you don't lose, it's not additive in the same way. Like, for instance, you if you were to take white and red paint and mix them together, you suddenly lose that, oh, I can see the red and the white. You get just pink. But if you just talk about it at the molecular level, you can be like, oh, well, we can still count the molecules and we can still have discrete molecular descriptions of the pink paint or whatever. And I think I always thought that's what supervenience was attempting to do, is have their cake and eat it too, kind of thing. Have it both ways.
Are there any...
Am I wrong?
I think so. Are there any
okay.
versions of this emergence talk that don't include the dependency relation? I definitely... Yes, supervenience has dependency, but I don't think that's all they're trying to say, because I think everybody in this whole realm of discourse is a dependency person. Because in order to emerge in the first place, you're saying that, yeah, we all agree that there are these lower level entities. The dispute would be about the putative higher level ones. Of course, they depend on the atoms.
I'm not saying, I may still be very wrong about supervenience. But what I was attempting to say was that dependency goes in only one direction or something like that. And that you still get these levels.
Goes in only one direction. In fact, let's see, I was saying causal influence goes in only one direction. In fact, that's one of...
sure.
There's this guy, Jag-Won Kim, who does a bunch of... Is one of the popular contemporary supervenience people, and he has two famous critiques of Gulick's radical kind emergence, or the kinds that I care about. And one of them is just the overdetermination argument that, he writes in such a technical way. That's who I was reading before with the M's and N's or whatever. It's very difficult to read out loud on a podcast, so I can't really give you his version. But when I do it in my own head, I was kind of thinking about, again, with the wetness thing. Let's say we've got a can of beer over here and a paper towel about a foot to its right, and then as we are wildly gesticulating about emergence talk in this hot and heavy podcast, we knock over the beer, and some runs across the table and begins to saturate the paper towel. So, with the supervenience thing, wetness is this higher level property, in quotes, that manifests every time you have... Well, yeah, I should do water instead of beer because its chemical composition is quicker to say. You got H2O molecules, whatever, in suitable arrangement. You're going to have this wetness, and then it runs across the table, and then you notice a change of color and a saturation increase on this paper product. Kim is saying the emergentist has too much cause going on, because if they want to say that wetness is something over and above patterns of behavior in H2O molecules, then when the question is, why is the paper towel wet, you have two answers. Well, one is, on L1, it got wet, or whatever, and then on L0, it's X number of H2O molecules got soaked up by it, or whatever. So now it's overdetermined. Two things caused it to get wet, I think, is the basics of one of his arguments against emergence. And I think that argument works, But it only works if you respect supervenience, which you shouldn't.
Okay.
But we're getting too far in the weeds probably for dawdling.
No, I'm just trying to see why I don't understand supervenience. Because, like, uh,
Yes, supervenience, no downward causation. Yes, supervenience, dependence on presence of basal conditions. So you're not wrong about either of those. I just think that you think that's all it is, and I think it's a little bit more than that. And the more is the assertion of necessity. That every time you have basal condition set X, you will have all and only the identical L1 property manifest. They're not genuinely novel. They are lawfully created or whatever. I don't even know if they would talk that way, if they would say it was created. They're manifest, whatever. But it's not important. But
okay, so
I don't think it's important. I think it's a big mistake.
Well, my thinking is I never really thought about necessity with supervenience, so maybe that's my biggest issue. All I needed was that it was just, level 1 tracks level 2, or level 0 or whatever, and that there's no relationship that level 0 doesn't have to be like, oh, I got to now track level 1 because it's doing something or whatever.
There's a one-directional relationship.
Yeah, right? That's what I mean. Okay. It's just bottom up. The whole
bottom up. And I'm just saying, for my taste, that ain't emergence. If that's what you can give me, then I would just stay being a reductionist. I don't think that counts. And I don't think epistemological emergence is even relevant. But this is a metaphysical question. Are there or are there not in our world, or to back up to your earlier question, ought we think there are genuine, novel properties at any level above the fundament that have causal influence? To me, that's the question. So if your answer includes, well, there are things on a level above the fundament that I could not predict from my knowledge of the atoms, I think it's a non sequitur. I wasn't asking you, buddy, about what you could predict. I want to know whether or not I should believe in novel causal powers in the universe.
Well, that's this is where I'm like, where's Matt to say it's trivial? I think the way when we study ourselves and the way we talk and the way we do things is the example to say, well, yeah, because we're the ones. So I don't know if I'm saying epistemological emergence or not. I would think to say that our cognitive patterns, or whatever the right phrase is, are justification enough to say that it's not just atoms. Because, after all, we're the motherfuckers who came up with atoms. Atoms didn't come up with atoms. We did. Or whatever particles and fundamentals are there. Like, we're the ones who did that. We study those things, and then we go turn and we look in the mirror and we study ourselves. And we put people in rooms and we try and understand how they arrange words into phrases and things to make sense of the world. And we also do it with telescopes and microscopes, and we collect animals in the field. We do all these things, but to me, it just seems like that's a huge one that you can't just skip by. Like, if anything, to me, that seems like a very important thing that justifies any kind of emergent pattern, because otherwise you're now telling a story about atoms, which are all that it is that's there. So somehow the atoms manage to be able to tell a story about themselves. Like, what the fuck? where are we going there? Like, that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. Because we don't talk about them at that level. We don't even describe them at that level, but somehow we're supposed to just take a leap of faith and say, oh, well, then, because we have some understanding of particles, we therefore must have, that those laws or ways that things interact at that level are having, whatever it is that's happening at another level that we're describing doesn't make any, it doesn't matter. It's just still the particles in the way that we talk and write about the particles or something. So there's something there that's amiss to me. Like, why can't that be enough?
Everything that we're talking about on both sides of the equation, the atoms and the ducks and the cups of water and the traffic jams, all of these things, human constructions. That's fine. Agreed. If that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay? So I agree with that. But I've tried to figure out how to word what I think the distinction is. And maybe this will be good and we'll find out that I have a mistaken, that I'm messing this up. If I want to ask a question about our ultimate, like our theory of everything, our metaphysical picture of what's going on around here, / the world / reality, whatever your favorite phrase is, ought that theory of everything include levels? I guess is one way to word it, because the reductionist is saying, nope, it only includes level. There's no plural. There's just one kind of stuff, one mode of investigating the behavior of that stuff. So if that question makes sense, in our theory of everything, ought there be levels? I don't think that the answer to that question ought include considerations about our ability to reason from a level that we've developed to another level that we've posited and are trying to fit. I don't think I'm saying this super clear. Did that help in any way?
There are things that you said that I have things to say too, but then you continued on and I got lost.
So, all right, we're starting from agreeing that everything that we're talking about is human constructions, quote unquote, obviously, in parentheses.
Insofar as our stories and language are concerned, which is the only way we communicate about these things.
So then how about when I say, all right, we're going to try to make a metaphysics, a theory of everything, our story about the universe. Is that all
Sure,
a thing you can deal with? Yep. So then when we're engaging in that, we have the question, is there more than one level in our metaphysics? Does that make sense as a question?
That makes sense.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. So then my point regarding what you were saying is, now we're going to try to answer that question. During the course of answering it, should we consider our ability to reason from one level that we made up to another level that we made up, and whether or not we can succeed at reducing level x to level x minus 1. That's a thing we could do, but to me that is irrelevant to the question that I just laid out.
Like, regardless of whether or not there's the human lineage and the natural spoken language and written language and stuff like that, are there levels?
Yeah. I mean, that's the question. The emergentist says yes, the reductionist says no. And then what you and I are currently disputing, I think, is when attempting to resolve the emergentist-reductionist dispute, should we include in that resolution facts about consilience, facts about human ability to reduce any given level to any given sub-level. And to me, that's irrelevant. Whether we ask it in terms of can Science 2018 Earth do it, or do we think there are reasons to suspect that anyone ever could, the ideal inquirer could, which I think is just a bad game to play in the first place. But
well, now I've forgotten what I was going to say about it. When you mentioned something was irrelevant, and I was like, bah! And then I don't remember now. But do you remember what you said you thought was irrelevant?
Whether or not anyone can theoretically, symbolically reduce level X to level X minus N. Any higher level to a lower level. Whether or not that can be done, to me, has nothing to do with the question, ought we include levels in our metaphysics?
This is a tough one. I didn't realize this was going to be this difficult. Because I'm like, fuck, what are we going to talk about?
I wonder if this is part of the explanation for my at the top complaint that this topic doesn't get enough airtime, is that it pretty swiftly becomes complicated.
I guess I'm having a difficult time compartmentalizing. You seem to be having an easier time doing that. I often think if we are to have, and I'm not the deep philosopher that you are, because I don't have an education in all these things, and I haven't been thinking about it ever since. Really, I've gone into philosophy much more deeply as a result of meeting you. So you have all those years ahead of time, and you've often also talked about, your own personal history and thinking about these things. But I don't know, for my part, I just think, I don't know how you can get away with not including, the human construction component in our metaphysics of whether or not there are levels.
If there I thought it was included. That was the first thing I said, and we agreed to. I feel I included it up front.
Okay. You included. So what's irrelevant then to the question of whether or not there are levels, whether or not the levels are human constructions?
What I think is irrelevant is whether any theorist is capable of reducing one human-invented level to another human-invented level. I'm agreeing that it's all just construction, social construction or whatever. But that becomes... I
think I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, okay.
Why would that be irrelevant?
Because that's
the next question.
Fact about the inquirer, not the... I was trying to make a question about the world / our best model of the world. So why would I care about facts about what inquirers are capable or incapable of doing?
I guess I was thinking it had a lot to do with the idea that the inquirers are the ones, at least. I mean, I'm not thinking about in the abstract. I'm thinking, this is like homegrown. Maybe there are aliens or robots out there that can do this kind of stuff and get to it better or whatever. And so we have a plural range of inquirers or whatever that use their own tools and techniques to get at these types of ideas. But my worry is that, you just starting with us and not even thinking about who else could do it or going abstract, it seems to me like it's nothing but it's the only relevant thing or whatever. Like it comes down to you know, if there is a level, it is not atoms or particles or whatever. It is, you know, humans talking and writing and communicating. That's the level, and then we create those other levels from there based on how we are able to interpret and collect information about the world. But there's always going to be the world coming through that filter. And so it's going to come down to, well, how do you do things? You know, and if we're always just doing things in a very particular way, then that's going to be the way that the world, that will be an influence on our metaphysics, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Maybe I'm way off, but that's kind of that's where I was coming from. You now have the job to shake me out of it so we can keep going.
I don't know if I'm capable, or I don't know if that's how we should proceed. I begin to suspect there's a miscommunication happening.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if there's a disagreement or a miscommunication.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not like heartfully into the disagreement, so I'm more than willing to be completely, you know, persuaded in a different direction. I'm just at this moment trying to see how to disenticle the sorry, that was an inside joke. Shit. Anyway,
Not appropriate.
I but I'm trying to figure out how to separate them, you know? So that it can be irrelevant, you know? How do we do that? You know, because that would be cool. Because I right now am obviously ignorant to that process. And I'm also very worried about us not getting getting off track. I didn't realize going into this that I would be this person. I'd be like, it's all just a construction. People hate that guy. I hate that guy. I'm like, the fucking dude. Shut up. And like, here I am. I'm like, well, weird.
I guess I've had an influence on you.
No, I think if anyone was to be influenced, I was most ready for it, you know? Like it was like I was just there and you just need to open the door and I was like, oh yeah, that's the door I like. But I'm not saying I'm a radical skeptic either, because I don't know I'm not going to be like, well, it's all just a brain in a vat or whatever. I want to stick to things that I can actually work with, not with fictions that are fun to, you know, the argument from absurdity or whatever. Sometimes that can be helpful, but it seems most of the time it isn't. It's just, you know, derails the conversation, and maybe that is what I'm doing. Jesus. I don't think so, though. I don't think I'm being absurd. I think it's tied to it. I think it's related. I don't think what I'm saying is just me being like, well, let me pluck this little random nugget out of my head and throw it at you, you know. No, I want to learn something. I'm not tied to radical thoughts about anything. I think we should be thoughtful about it. And sometimes when you say things characterizing what other people have said, I'm like, and it's like, you know, the red flashing light goes up, and I'm like, wait a minute.
That's a good thing.
Yes.
Yeah, there will be, if I have anything to say about it, future episodes that deal with the skeptical arguments from absurdity.
Yeah,
and I think we should come back, maybe, if we feel the desire, to this issue after we get to the downward causation issue and an article that we've both read and enjoyed regarding that. And then we'll revisit this and see if epistemological emergence has any bearing on the Campbell, I think.
Okay.
So, I wasn't able yet to persuade you that epistemological emergence is not the way to go. We need to have ontological emergence if it's going to be interesting. And ontological emergence is established in part by downward causation. What the hell is that? Right?
Yeah.
What?
Yes.
Downward causation? So now we get to be multimedia or whatever, right? We get to call out. We'll see if we can pull off our technological...
Let's do it again. This is good.
Yeah, we're going to let some other folks come in. Some big, heavy hitters here.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, this was addressed in a recent podcast by... In an interview between... Or I don't know if it was a forum or what it was. They were in a theater or something. Between...
They're at the Schnitzer in Portland, Oregon.
The podcaster Sam Harris and the physicist Sean Carroll, when they, not on purpose, but ended up talking about this real quick. So I'll see if it works to play it.
There are these higher levels of emergent descriptions, but they better be compatible with the lower levels. And in particular, I'm not a fan of what even some of my scientific colleagues call downward causation.
Right.
The idea that somehow the shape of a macroscopic thing or the purpose of a macroscopic thing can feed back and change the behavior at the microscopic level in a way that you wouldn't have known about if you were just doing the microscopic level. I think that it really is reductionistic in that sense. In principle, we can build up. Now, in practice, when we do biology or chemistry or psychology, there is a non-reductionist element in the sense that as a practical matter, the way to learn new things about biology is not to think about particle physics, right? We can discover regularities at the higher levels that are, we don't need to know about what's going on at the lower levels to discover them, but they still better be compatible with them.
Right. So let's revisit that notion of downward causation, because it has never made sense to me either. So the idea is that you have emergent properties like minds and consciousness or just the macro level, as you say, shape of objects, right? So you have collections of atoms that, at some higher level, have very even temperature is an emergent property. I mean, one atom doesn't have a temperature, but you get collections together, and then their motion is described as temperature. But this notion that a higher level phenomenon can then, by virtue of its existing at the higher level, come down and have causal properties with respect to the lower level. How is it that people are endorsing that idea? Because we have scientists who are talking in those terms.
You've come to the wrong place, because it's one of those ideas I've tried to understand. There's a lot of smart people who believe this is a very important part of how we describe nature. I've never even been able to understand what they're saying, really, I think. Well enough. You would like to understand something well enough to be able to give a good defense of it yourself before you said it was wrong, which I don't think I can do. But the example on the level of...
Well, we're a couple of smart people. Maybe. We'll see if we can help Sean Carroll understand what other people think downward causation is. Maybe.
Right, maybe. Do you want me to read from Campbell's awesome paper on downward causation? Or do you want to?
I will read something, and then you can see if I'm saying the same thing you would have said and try to fix it. So,
nice.
1974, Donald Campbell, Downward Causation in Hierarchically Organized Biological Systems. I think they attribute this as the coinage, if not the popularization of the term, downward causation. And this is one that we've both read and really like and see some value in. So at one point, Campbell has in a numbered list the term downward causation, which makes me suspect that this might be a version of his definition of it. The laws of the higher level selective system determine in part the distribution of the lower level events and substances. So I think that's what Campbell thinks downward causation is. And then he has what he calls a concrete biological example. And it runs this way.
Yeah.
This will all be quotes, but with various ellipses in the middle. Consider the anatomy of the jaws of a worker termite or ant. The hinge surfaces and the muscle attachments agree with Archimedes' laws of levers, that is, with macro mechanics. They are optimally designed to apply the maximum force at a useful distance from the hinge. The laws of levers are one part of the complex selective system operating at the level of whole organisms. We need, claims Campbell, the law of levers and organism-level selection to explain the particular distribution of proteins found in the jaw and hence the DNA templates guiding their production. And then he goes further. That one got us from proteins and DNA to organisms, and then he's going to take us even farther to entire societies when he says, if we now consider the jaw of a soldier termite or ant, the soldier jaws are so specialized for piercing enemy ants and termites, huge multi-pronged antler pincers, that the soldier cannot feed itself and has to be fed by workers. The soldier's jaws and the distribution of protein therein require for their explanation certain laws of sociology, centering around division of labor, social organization.
Yeah.
Does that get at it?
Yes. That gets at it really well. So in that way we have, some kind of macro mechanics operating. You've got natural selection operating, and also a, sociological process or mechanism like division of labor operating at this level in order to get the antler pincers of the soldier ant or termite, as he says. To me, this is the classic example of how do you influence the distribution of proteins and the smaller particulates in any system, how do you influence that? And in this case, you can have various factors involved. One of them being, the social organization of ants in a colony. And in order to have defense, there's a certain sacrifice that's implied, where you're going to have these huge antler pincers, but you can't eat. So someone's got to feed you. That's just, great, and so I don't know exactly the process upon which you eventually get something like antler pincers and who decides, how to feed the organism that has that. It's crazy to think of how that comes about. But nonetheless, you have that, pattern. And that to me is the key example. I don't care so much for his definition as the example, of a circumstance where you have influence on some lower level from a higher level. Sean Carroll and Sam Harris.
The lower level, in this case, being proteins. Like most of the evening we've been talking about atoms or whatever. So now proteins are playing that role. These are not necessarily the bottom, but, they're a lower level. And then, So, group selection or something being a possible higher level, or what? I mean, a higher level is just the phenotype of a given ant, right? That's bigger than a protein. And then larger than that is the society of which that ant is a member, etc.
But even still, like in any, you can extrapolate, or not extrapolate, but you can carry this over to like any discrete molecular structures in organisms that are part of the organs and various capacities that they possess. And to me, that seems to be, and I don't know, maybe someone could point out why that's not enough to explain a way in which we have downward causation as it is understood as there being a top-down influence on the lower level. But that's good enough for me. I remember when I read that the first time, I thought I was kind of blown away, because I too was like, I don't understand this stuff. And then when I read that, I was like, okay, I get it. It's just like, all right, yep, sure, that makes sense to me.
So I don't know yet. We'll find out if the sense that it makes to you, to what extent it matches up with what this does when I read it. So I think about it in these terms. Select a space-time region. And let's just, for our purposes, describe that region as something that most of us would call an anthill or whatever if we were around, and 10 yards of lawn around it, whatever. Yeah. So we grab out this chunk of universe. And then some of our questions as metaphysicians would be to attempt to provide a description of and reason for the distribution of substance within that region. So if we're going to talk on, let's say, 2 levels. 1, the level of description we call proteins. 2, the level of description we call ants. And so we want to say, all right, metaphysics guy, tell me your story, your why story, as to explain the distribution of proteins in our region. Is that a sensible question? Is any of this making sense?
Yeah.
Before I keep going? Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
Part of the distribution of those proteins we could describe as the pincers of the warrior ants, or whatever they are. What do you want me to call them?
Soldier ants
The
or
soldier
whatever.
ants,
It doesn't
yeah.
matter.
So we've got that protein. We zoom in on the head of one ant, and we look at this shape of these pincers, and we're like, okay, well, these proteins are sitting here in this shape within our region. How did they get there? Why are they like that? Explain that shape to me. And the reductionist is going to have to do so in terms of proteins and the laws governing proteins, period. Right? Or if we want to go, if we say ants are on level 5 and proteins are on level 2 or whatever, but atoms are level 0,
yeah.
maybe, all right, explain it in terms of atoms, or, whatever you want it, wherever
Right.
your reductionist leanings take you. And my interpretation of Campbell's claim is that cannot be done. I have a good/better explanation of that distribution of proteins in our region, but it includes reference to ants and even to the entire colony of ants and their ancestors and a lineage, and you've got to have all of these.
Right.
You got to have evolutionary history, and you got to have all this stuff in order to explain that distribution. And mine is better than yours.
Mm-hmm.
Is that? I mean, that's the lesson I'm taking out of it.
That's the lesson I took out of it.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think it's a really good one, and I wish everybody knew it, unless you have changed your mind since, and we'd like to describe why you think it's different, or why you don't think it's as powerful as it is. But I still am like, I think it was just the distribution of protein therein as he talks. I'm thinking like, that was to me a big eye opener, I guess. I remember thinking, yeah, duh. And I wonder sometimes if he came up with that all on his own. Because if he did, I'm thinking that's some serious contribution right there. But again, I don't know. It's weird, like you were saying about this topic. People don't tend to want to get into it or something like that. I don't know because it gets complicated or weird or something. Sometimes if this is as good as I think it is, then it just comes down to like who has access, to this information. And if you don't have access to it, you might scratch your head. And the thing I don't like about like just some of the emergent stuff up to this point, the reductionism, supervenience, emergence, is that none of it feels right to me, And I know we're supposed to be intellectual thinking people here, but the 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 thrust of this to me is so much more like satisfying and an explanation of how you get soldier antler pincers or whatever than just to be like, well, it's all just the particles or whatever and the laws that govern them. It's so much more satisfying, at least. And I don't know if that's good or bad or what, but I will say that I'm way more persuaded by that than by anything else that we've talked about until this point. I mean, and I knew ahead of time going into this, but still. You're like, don't tell your biases. I'm like, too late.
Just to solidify and drill this in, if it isn't already obvious, as to how this relates to downward causation. That means from a level with a higher index to a level with a lower index. The zero level being whatever the fundamental substance of the world is, which tonight we've been using the term atoms to refer to. It is still a big claim. Like, I don't think we should skip over how contentious and difficult and how big it is to say that facts about an ant colony had causal influence over the space-time trajectory of an atom, or what, that it pushed it around. Hofstadter's question of who pushes whom around or whatever. To me, that's still, a big challenge, and I like the Campbell example a lot. I'm not 100% persuaded by it. I still think I don't know, but it's a good example and a good way to frame a discussion, I think. But in order for downward causation to be established, we have to do that. You have to literally be saying there's some kind of macro, social, historical, evolutionary fact that had an effect on the location of an atom or a protein, like this physical object. And that would break a lot of rules, right? Would it not even break what they call the causal closure of the physical? That anything that happens in physics to an entity of physics, if we're just, again, it's also complicated, but let's just say particle. I know some people say there's no particles, whatever. That anything that moves a particle has to itself be physical. This, I think, would break that rule, right? And physics would no longer be causally closed. And a lot of people care a lot about that.
Well, why would it be, how is the social stuff not physical, I guess?
It's physical in the sense that it depends on, again, that's what I was saying earlier, that I think everybody is a dependence relation acceptor. There would be no ant colony if there were no atoms. Any of the putatively higher level things depend upon the lower level. I think we're all buying that. It's just that in order to even countenance the existence of ants or ant colonies, you have to be, in my opinion, an ontological emergentist. Reductionism entails mereological nihilism. If reductionist claims are correct, then the right answer is to say nothing but atoms exists. Everything else is an instrumentalist fiction, and they might pragmatically help you explain things, but they don't exist. And you don't exist, nothing exists, it's just atoms. Fuck you. I think if reductionism is right, you have to say that. And reductionism might be right. And in order for it to be wrong, we have to be able to establish Campbell-style, genuine downward causation. And that's hard. I think we can. I like it. But, I don't want to be glib about it.
I mean, I guess I have a difficult time saying that that's hard because that's like everything in evolution. So it's like, oh, okay. Uh-oh. Now it's like, what is it? It's just going to be physicists against biologists now? Is that the thing? Because I mean, that sounds to me like everything in biology, you know? So what? You know, because I don't know. I mean, because obviously it's not fair to say physicists against biologists because some physicists study galaxies. So, I won't put them all into the particle physicists camp, But I guess then is that what it is? It's particle physicists.
Right. The physicists might be wrong too, or whatever. It's just the
biology.
To purposefully, use a word wrong. The fundamentalists. Meaning whoever studies that which is the fundamental substance.
Yeah, that's good.
That'll
really make some people upset.
Our closest approximation to fundamentalists are physicists.
Yeah.
But, right. All right. But yes, the way that I run all this stuff from my perspective is, if reductionism were true, biology would be 100% false. Everything that it said, every entity it talks about and every mechanism it uses or whatever, it would all just be fictional.
Okay, so this goes back to my original issue then, because I don't see why that's a big deal. To me, I think, well, then it's not an open and shut case, but I don't think there's as much support then for the particle physics fundamentalist view. Because, after all, the thing that they might say is an illusion is still the thing upon which it's where we begin. We begin with the organism and the capacities that organism possesses. If we don't have that, then I'm not sure how we start there and not at particles or whatever. Do you know what I'm saying? How do we begin with the organism telling stories, the human organism? And all its capacities through its nervous system. Even that's a story, I get it. But still, how do we get that, interacting, you and me, ancestors 100,000 years ago, whatever. And then we eventually get to a point where we can say, oh, well, we found out that it's just, that seems like a huge leap to me, because then you are required to come up with another way to explain the illusion. That's a challenge if you only have particles. Whereas it seems a much easier job to say we have this, organism, we've dissected people when we went to war and we chopped their heads off and we did all these things, or we eat animals and we tear them apart. And we have their ribs and we're chewing on it. And, we have more information that way. And that's kind of the point that I think we begin at. That just seems a lot easier. And then now what we learn about, ecological networks and how, you don't even have to have a social organization to influence biological systems. As far as that would be concerned, all the organisms in an ecosystem are influencing each other and their traits and their pincers and their so it's now much You know, so that's the whole thing, and that's where we come from, at least as far as we can tell, because you know, we're still here. You still fly in an airplane to go to Africa, and you go onto the bush, and the lion chases you, and you're like, oh shit, you know, that still can happen, but like, you know, we don't. How do we get convinced that, oh well, atoms, particles, whatever, that's the real story? How do we? You know, that seems to me the bigger leap of faith.
This reminds me of another future episode.
Sweet.
When I will be attempting to argue that consciousness doesn't exist and people have a very hard time understanding what that could even mean. I think people have a hard time understanding and appreciating a consistent, genuine, reductionist picture. Because I think that from that perspective, the correct answer to most or all of the questions you just asked would be, those are ill-formed questions. I don't have to answer them because all of the things that you used as subjects in your sentences don't exist. So if your question is, how do we get from these apes who have English language developing all this stuff back to the atoms? Well, there are no apes. There is no such thing as English. All there is atoms, following the laws of physics. And, you know, the end. Like, so I think that the reductionist wouldn't even feel a burden to respond to those questions, other than to say, the ontology on which those questions is predicated is false. And so, they're bad questions.
Oh yeah. I why are you so why do you struggle with that position? Because I'm not sure how you cannot see that is so patently absurd. That it wouldn't include anything but some conclusion that was drawn from, you know, like that. It's like a position that says fuck you to its own history or something like that. Like it's like a current events, and that's all it cares about. You know, you only care about the current events in the news, and that's all that exists. It's such a, like, why are you so like, oh my god, this position, I don't know what to do. Like, that's bizarre to me.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question.
It's also bizarre to me that I just saw you drink out of a Pepsi, and I'm like, where's the beer? Anyway. Answer one or the other. It doesn't matter.
And this could be another one of those places where you're pointing out a place where my personal history has led me astray. I know very little about math and not much more about physics. Nevertheless, those domains have done a good job of public relations or something, because they've reached out to this kind of like pseudo-postmodern, super skeptic, whatever I am, like this philosophy guy, and convinced me that, not that, like, I can't defend this claim, but this is a claim that they make and they've convinced me of. That's science/physics is the best strategy, set of tools, model, whatever you want to call it, that we have so far. You know, the way they usually reference it now is quantum physics and general relativity, though we haven't figured out how to tie them together yet. These are the two most successful and explanatory models that humanity has developed. I can't defend that, but other people have persuaded me of it. But even the people who have persuaded me of it don't seem to properly address what I think the entailments of accepting that are. It's kind of like so in philosophy of science they have that argument they call the pessimistic meta-induction, where the historians of science talk about, well, you shouldn't trust it too much because science has changed its mind a lot of times. So if science 1918 was wrong about a lot of stuff, science 2018 is probably wrong about a lot of stuff. I think this is kind of an optimistic meta-induction thing. That since science/physics has been ascendant, dominant, effective, persuasive for hundreds of years, at least 100, 150, whatever, and debatable how much further back you want to go, I think it deserves a lot of respect. That's what has given us technology, and it's pragmatically useful, and it's argumentatively persuasive, and it's got a lot of virtues. And as I mentioned earlier, most people, including me, value methodological reductionism. Even though I still lean towards being an emergentist, I think if we can reduce a higher level to a lower level, we would be better off to do so. And again, I went through that list of virtues earlier, and it could be done better. But you get, more certainty, better predictive success, better experimental replication, all these things that we think are good. It's more parsimonious. And I like Occam's razor, so if we can chop off all of psychology or something and reduce it to neuroscience, fucking great, do it. If we can chop off biology and reduce it to chemistry, great, do it. If we can go all the way down to the fundamentalists, I think we should.
Ontologically or methodologically? I got lost there.
If we can methodologically do it, then we should do it. If we do it, then our ontological position respects only the fundament, and then, so, right. Yeah.
That I understand. I don't know. This, I think, is one of those drunk on success kind of problems, because I think that physics has resolved a number of interesting problems and asked a lot of answerable questions, and then grown frameworks from there. And I also think the thing about physics that's so great and successful is that, at least the history of it, it's as much a history of how to isolate and control, various factors, in systems, so that you can kind of try and, witness the behaviors of different parts of the systems. You can have your ceteris paribus kind of arrangements. In biological systems, and in, I guess you could also say, chemistry systems or chemical systems, you don't always get that, and so it becomes much more difficult to isolate and to control all these different various factors. Now, one tempting thing I think that happens, and this is the drunk off success thing, is that you get, you have a more a simpler system to work on, and you have success, and then you kind of hit your ceiling on the way up, or whatever, hit your head on the ceiling on the way up, or whatever, and go, well, if we have just these systems that we can control and we can kind of um, examine in great detail and we can predict and work on, then, all these other things are just a simple matter of adding more parts, and they're just all moving. And if we could do this ad infinitum, we would have a good understanding of how everything works. But I don't know if that is at all like a safe assumption, since there are these various kinds of behaviors that people weren't able to predict using, math and, chemistry and, large scale systems. And so one of those things would be like chaos, right? That was something that we've come upon, and we never could have gotten there I think just simply by, trying to add one new piece onto the next in a system, like a nice physical system or whatever. And so I don't know. I guess I'm very, very skeptical of that. I can understand where you can get there from the extreme reductionism. And I certainly don't have a problem of reducing methodologically systems into their components. But at the same time, I do worry if there's anything that's going on that I wouldn't be able to, that I would miss, essentially is what it comes down to. I'm skeptical that I know it all.
I mean, the super bumper sticker way, I think, of expressing what I'm trying to get at here is just that I place the burden of proof on the emergentist because of the general epistemic values that I employ, primarily parsimony or whatever. If the fundamentalists want to say, yeah, I can do it all with just the atoms, if they can, then they win and the end, given my value set. And, okay, so you're agreeing with that. All right.
I am, but so I don't agree with the idea that the burden of proof... Well, hold on. I don't agree with the idea that the burden of proof isn't on them as well. Like, it just doesn't, I don't see how the burden of proof isn't shared by all parties.
Well, in the sense of everyone has the same job of explaining the evolution of the state of the world, then yeah. But since the emergentist kind of by definition has a more profligate ontology than the reductionist, they have a greater burden, in my opinion. Because they want to say, yes, atoms exist, but also water exists, and traffic jams, and ducks, and whatever. Everything that you want to add in and say, I think you need to include this on your table of things that exist. You just continue to accrue burdens. This is another thing that usually happens in emergence discussions, is that I end up arguing kind of for the reductionist or whatever, because so many people, in my opinion, don't fully appreciate and respect the force of the reductionist position. Because I still want to be an emergentist. I still think there are genuine novel causal properties in the universe. But in order to even get there, I feel you need to walk through the fire of really considering that there's nothing but atoms. And most people haven't done that right.
Well, my thinking is that, I don't know, I think I can walk through the fire if there's really nothing but some fundamental particles. And to me, that doesn't, there's no, what am I trying to say? There's no fulcrum upon which that actually explains anything. Like, it just is a nice thing to say, and you can say everything's just a wash in particles, but like, and then what? Whereas the Campbell explanation is like a really nice fulcrum, one of the things that we talk about a lot is why, things like why definitions matter. And I think this Campbell example and way of talking about things it matters because it helps you conceptualize the problem. If, as you have described reductionist in the extreme, is all you need and no one gets it, I think I know why. It's because it doesn't sound like a very strong position other than to be extreme and to say, well, there's nothing but particles and I don't understand why you don't understand the depth of that or the severity or the strength or whatever of that, point. Well, give me an explanation of the universe or something from just the particles. Like, give me an explanation of the antler pincers from just the particles or whatever. Campbell's giving you an explanation from certain levels. And I know I understand what you just said about feeling like you always end up getting pinned into a position you don't want to be. You're playing like devil's advocate and you don't want to. But I'm just saying, like, give me that explanation. And I don't think they can. And somehow yet you are saying the burden of proof lies on Campbell. And I'm thinking, no. If anything, I'll say the burden of proof lies on both parties. Campbell's met the challenge. But these extreme reductionists, as far as I can tell, unless you're gearing up to hit me hard with a good example, have not.
I'm gearing up all right. But
all right.
To bring in a new point that we haven't got to yet, but I think has some force.
Good. Is it like in the same weight class as Campbell?
That'll be for you to judge. Stephen Pepper, this comes from, if anyone cares. The epistemological challenge. There could never be good reason to posit an emergent property as opposed to complicating our fundamental theory to accommodate unusual macroscopic behavior. So we've got the new phenomenon that needs explaining. The distribution of proteins in our universe chunk around the anthill. Wouldn't it always be a legal move, given the two theories, atomism or social evolutionary theory or whatever, atomism or socialism, couldn't the fundamentalist always say, it's not a novel causal property that emerged, it was rather a latent fundamental property that had not yet been immersed in an environment to pull out that behavior? Is this making sense yet?
Some of the words you've used have tripped me up, but
maybe it's just the case that any time a protein is surrounded by other proteins in this certain way, then it makes a large pincer. Or maybe couldn't it always just be a complication of the fundamental theory? It's still all atoms. It's just the atoms are way more complicated than you realized. They have a whole bunch of latent... They're in there. They've just never been immersed in an environment to bring them out, to make those properties expressed. But it was still just in the atom. It's not that something above it on a higher level reached down and moved the atom. It was still just a causal property of that atom. It's just that the universe finally reached a state that made it move that way. Okay, still not making sense? Analogy.
No, I mean, it makes sense. I just have... Yeah, go ahead and keep talking. Makes sense, but I don't agree yet.
Do the cellular automata thing. You think that So you're setting up your thing. You think there's 4 rules in this Conway's Game of Life, and that every black-white flip that you ever witness on your monitor will always be explicable in terms of the 4 rules that are written on the right-hand side in the column next to your program. But all of a sudden, maybe, there's an anomalous flip that doesn't, a cell turns black that was previously white. And then you look and you're like, okay, none of my 4 rules that I programmed in here explains that. Anomaly, shit, we gotta figure out how to explain this happening. One possible explanation: cellular automata have emergent properties, and one was discovered, and now there's a new rule that wasn't there before, but now is there, and we have to figure out what that rule is. We have to discover the rule. Or you could suspect my list of rules written on the right-hand side of my screen was incomplete. Whoever set up the CSS over there or whatever, they put a blank div over the rule number 5, and we just, okay, I figured that rule was always there and it was always operating. It's just that over the first 1 million generations, there was never a setup anywhere in my program that matched Rule 5. Rule 5 is not new. It didn't just emerge or develop. It was always there. It was just hidden from me, and it was never noticed because it never applied. But now, on generation 1,000,001, there was suddenly a cell that matched the very complicated conditions of Rule 5. So the question being, was it already there but never activated, or did it get created somewhere in the operating of the program? And Pepper's point is, anytime you think a new Rule 5 somehow got generated by my program, you could always have the alternative hypothesis: Rule 5 was always there, you just didn't know it was there. And there was never a condition that was governed by Rule 5, so you were just ignorant of it. That maybe didn't help.
Yeah, I mean, that didn't help, but...
God damn it, I liked it. Fuck.
Why does that help you?
I don't know how... let's see, how do I explain why it helps me?
Or why is it persuasive, I mean?
I guess, again, just referencing my epistemic values or something. Because that seems right to me. Again, as a skeptic, I have all these fucking prefatory statements on. I never have a high degree of confidence that at any time I possess an exhaustive rule set that explains the evolution of the states of a system. I might be wrong. I think I've got them all, but maybe I'm wrong and I just haven't. It's never reached a state that this new rule applies. That seems totally plausible to me. So if an anomalous circumstance arises and I have the 2 alternative hypotheses, a new rule has come into being, or we have finally discovered a pre-existing rule. Those are 2 alternatives that both explain the current data, and if I do nothing beyond rely on my epistemic values, I would have to prefer the Pepper version, that the rule was always there, I just never saw it.
I guess I might be, maybe I'm just getting caught up in something or whatever it is. I worry about biases and all that kind of stuff, but this feels to me like the same move that you would object to in other situations, like you know, oh, there's free will, but it's just not what you think it is. We used to say free will is this, and now we're going to say, well, free will is something else now. Like, it just seems like a goalpost move. Like, wow, hold on, there's rules out there we just didn't know about, so we get to keep our reductionist view of the things. Because remember, we had said, yeah, there's just particles, and there's there's just the laws and stuff like that. Oh, new law, like, oh, whew, good thing we got this social. It looks like social organization, but it's just another law. And they keep doing it, like, oh, new particle, new law. Well, whoo, this particle divides into other particles now. Like, it just keeps moving the goalpost. The thing that seems to me to remain always is this, this ability to split and combine. That seems to be the most common streak in a lot of these characterizations. I don't know. That just seems, that's why I like it. The one thing I love about the Campbell example is it's like this thing, like, it just goes boom on the table, and you get to go, okay, now it's like the Darwin thing, a theory with which to work, and I don't think that just saying, well, there's a new rule, you just didn't know about it. That's just like I want to keep this because I like this, and so it's just a new rule. I don't, like, of course, you could say that about anything, though, right? You could say that about the emergence stuff. Like, well, there could be rules that are influencing the pincers that we don't know about. We just only accounted for 3, macromechanics, natural selection, and social organization. Like, oh, but there could have been another one. Like, you can just, I don't like that move because you can do it wherever you want, whenever you want. No, that's what I like about Campbell's thing, again, is that it's something that you can beat up if you want. Like, we could do something with that. Like, this other thing we can't do. It's just always going to move that goalpost, is how it seems to me. And that's frustrating. I don't like that, because I thought, I don't know. I don't have respect for that as much as I do for somebody who's like, okay, here you go. I thought about this, kill it, whatever. Beat it up. See how far it can last.
Do you forget all this crap I added on top of it? Do you think that you get the nugget or whatever? The point this guy's trying to make when he says there could never be a good reason to posit an emergent property as opposed to complicating our fundamental theory.
Never be a good reason to say that just slower. I'm sorry.
There could never be a good reason to posit an emergent property as opposed to complicating our fundamental theory.
Well, isn't that essentially what happens? Isn't that biology? Isn't that chemistry? Complicating your fundamental theory? Like, oh, crap, it was simple and beautiful, and now we have to add this other new wrinkle. Like, isn't that the whole point? That chemistry complicates physics, and biology complicates chemistry, and, psychology complicates biology. Like, isn't that the whole point of this whole thing? Isn't he just restating it in a way that puts it in a good light for reductionism?
I don't really like what you just said, but it made me think of a possible counterexample to what this guy's saying. What about Ptolemaic astronomy?
What?
It's not really an emergent property thing, but isn't that what the Ptolemaic astronomy thing was all about? Was just, we keep our theory the same, but we just put in more epicycles to explain the anomalous data. We see the stars/planets appearing in places slightly off from where we thought they should be. Oh, well, that's because they also have a minuscule orbit around some other thing, and we just add more and more and more miniature cycles.
Really, we just have a bad theory.
So that's, I don't know to what extent that's analogous or not to what this guy's
That
saying.
seems that seems similar though. That would be a good one. If I had thought of it, I would bring it up.
Complicating the fundamental theory stays the same. You complicate it rather than paradigm shift or whatever.
Okay, yeah, and that seems like, for instance, like the orbits of the fact that they wanted them to be circular, and then they had to be elliptical, and then they had to like change them around. They had to perturb the orbits, and then finally you've got Einstein, who's just like gives you a whole other way of doing it, and it works. You're like, oh, okay, the orbits work now in a way that they never did before. If I have that correct, I think that's what you're saying. And instead of having an ever more complicated, poke at the system type of way of saying it, you just end up coming up with a completely different theory for explaining it, like Einstein did or whatever. Completely is a bad word to use, but a different one. Completely different. Absolutely, completely out of left field.
So
I don't like Pepper and his explanation. That I didn't like that at all.
All right, fuck you, man. What's your name? Pepper?
Pepper or something?
You're garbage. No, I still think there's something there, but there are also good responses. So I wanted to real quick hop back to the earlier question and see if it is viewed differently in light of the fresh Campbell ants. If the concern is explaining the distribution of proteins in the region, how is even considering or talking about the epistemological abilities of human theorists, can we, in 2018, reduce ants to proteins or not? How is that relevant to the question of what altered the location of that protein? The society or the atoms?
I mean, is that, the question you think one should pose when confronted with ants and their pincers?
I thought we had agreed earlier that a good question, something that we cared to answer, was, what explains the distribution of proteins in this region?
Yeah. Society or some new rules.
In other words, like what pushes around the proteins or the atoms that make up the proteins? What causes them to be located where they are located? When I'm trying to answer that question, I don't see how it's relevant to consider epistemological emergence. I don't want to think about what can or can't theorists reduce A's to B's or, level ones to level zeros. That doesn't seem to matter. What I want to know is, what were the causal influences on the location of the atoms that make up this protein?
Yeah. I hate to say it, but I kind of want to say, well, you're saying what were the major causal influences, right? Because even at the protein level, if something's bumping into something else, it's, it's going to have, the positioning and stuff will be at a microscopic level determined by that, but that won't be the overall general shape of a pincer or whatever you're saying, something like that.
Yeah. So, the word that I like to use in this kind of location, and it's a huge word that deserves its own podcast or 10, is relevant. What were the relevant influences? And determining relevance, I realize, is a huge thing, but...
Right. So, yeah, right now, based on what Campbell has to say and what Pepper has to say, I would go with Campbell. Because at least there's something there. With Pepper, all I get is some vague notion of there's a new rule somewhere out there that I just don't, It's almost epistemological with pepper.
To ad hominem you a bit, do you think that's because you really like examples that come from biology and you don't like total abstruse philosophical arguments that don't have obvious concrete connections to the things you typically think about?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it has to be biology. It could be any kind of, uh, you know, um, it could be any, it could be physical, or you know what I mean. It could be like we were just talking about orbits and things like that. Like it could be that. It doesn't have to be biological. I definitely prefer those, and I'll, I don't know if it's aesthetic or if it's, it helps me understand the problem better. You know what I mean? Like I don't know if both, what have you. But I definitely like those. They also, to me, are something that I can keep track of, and they aren't these. I don't like anything where I could say it in any instance. You know what I mean? Like I like it if um, emergence is to be something, then it is to be something specifically, and not, you know, like I just told you. Like I thought the move that Pepper makes, you could make as well in the emergence case of the pincers and the downward causation and all that. Like there could be another factor involved in creating the pincers at the higher level too. Like, so I just don't, yeah, that seems to me too wishy-washy, and you have gone nowhere, you know? And even I would then challenge you to say, well, maybe you are also doing something similar and that you have an aesthetic preference for those kinds of moves. And yeah, that would be my only thing to say about that.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
You're like, yeah,
You
went
like
on too
ant
long.
stories.
I like ants.
Should we even keep going? It's been a long time. We've surpassed our 2 hours.
Yeah. Although I personally, again, don't think they
such-
have to be 2 hours long.
Yeah.
They can be whatever.
This topic is awesome, I think. It's just
Yeah, it
easy
goes
to
on.
keep going.
Yeah, it does.
Well, I don't know. Well, let's touch on this other thing, and if it goes somewhere, this will be a long one, and if it goes nowhere, then it's bonus time.
I know. I'm like, I need to go get another beer. I guess I could edit it out.
Yeah, fuck that.
Anyway.
You don't have time for that. And you need to be sober to hear this. No.
Okay. Yeah. Go do it. Go.
One of the emergentists that I like is the anthropologist, biologist Terence Deacon, and he wrote a big fat book relatively recently called Incomplete Nature, which is all about this. But prior to that, he published an article that I think is wonderful, and people who like and care about emergence should check it out, called The Hole at the Wheels Hub. And he has kind of a new spin on this that we haven't yet touched on in any of the other people, which is summarized in a quote that he includes in his article from nowhere else than the Tao Te Ching.
Oh, yeah.
Which runs this way. 30 spokes converge at the wheel's hub to an empty space that makes it useful. Clay is shaped into a vessel to take advantage of the emptiness it surrounds. Doors and windows are cut into walls of a room so that it can serve some function. Though we must work with what is there, use comes from what is not there, is the Lao Tzu quote he includes. And his point is about what they call affordances, defined as a specific absence rather than a mere nothing. So a large part of Deacon's point is that all absences, all nothings, are not the same. some nothings are very particular and very important. The ones that are properly framed and can be teleologically employed by something else, in the way I understand it. So I like, for example, like a pitcher or whatever. Well, the part that we use of a pitcher is the empty part, the nothing, the middle. From a certain perspective, there's no difference between just some air out in front of me or the air inside an empty pitcher, right? But there are important differences to me between equivalent volumes of empty air in front of me and the empty air inside of a pitcher, because I can do very different things with those two absences. And so Deacon builds up affordances, possibilities, directions of arrangement of atoms based on these specific absences that I think is really interesting and useful. And he goes on to talk a lot about the whole, complex systems and self-organization and the whole idea of the whirlpool and, all that kind of stuff. And it's very interesting.
No, I am definitely... But how does it play into emergence?
Deacon's definition of emergence is the spontaneous appearance of unprecedented orderliness in nature. And I'll have to find further quotable passages.
I have another question for you.
Yeah.
How are these affordances any different than a spandrel? Or are they the same?
Say more about that.
Like the spandrel, remember the conversation we had before? That was an empty space created by the structure around it and then was made use of later. It's not too different than any other empty space or space of wall or what have you. And they use that in a very particular way.
Yeah, I like that analogy. Yeah.
So how might that relate to evolution and novelty and the origin of, traits and things like that, but that it may not necessarily itself be something selected for? I think we're in uncharted territory and riffing.
No, I think this is a lot like spandrels, I guess. Or at least the way you're describing it and the way it seems to me right now. This is pretty similar. It's other than that in the spandrel case, it was a human architect who may or may not be conscious or whatever and appreciated an opportunity, and the Deacon versions would clearly not include any kind of intelligent agency noticing and taking advantage of these affordances, but rather that they would be spontaneous physical pattern, like it just would happen. It's not that anyone appreciates it. Here's a few more things to say about it that may or may not. What you want?
I was going to say, the spandrel just happened too, I think. I don't think it in particular was designed. They go, oh, and then they noticed it. Like you would notice the picture or whatever. You'd be like, oh, well, I don't know if the picture you'd notice the empty space. I think you design it for it, but.
I'm saying the spandrel just happened, but then putting
later, right.
Putting art inside of it happened later.
Yeah.
More things that Deacon says about this. The principal hypothesis of this essay is that emergent phenomena grow out of an amplification dynamic that can spontaneously develop in very large ensembles of interacting elements by virtue of continuing circulation of interaction, constraints, and biases, which become expressed as system-wide characteristics. And I think, that word salad, whatever, hard to get on a podcast. But I mean, I think the whirlpool example kind of gets at that, right? There's nothing over and above the water molecules flowing down the river, and then the rock or other perturbation mechanism that changes the density or the flow, the likelihood of them going in any given direction. But once the system is perturbed in the right way, and you've just got your stupid water molecules following the laws of fluid dynamics or whatever they're doing, but there's less resistance to go northeast right now or whatever, and then they all just spontaneously develop this pattern, and then it amplifies. As soon as one says, oh, well, this is the easiest direction to go right now, so I'm going to go, that alters the likelihood of the trajectory of all the other ones, and then it just spirals, whirlpools, up. And then these emergent forms of causality, were there to be any, are due to a curious type of circular connectivity of causal dynamics, rather than a special form of causality, according to Deacon. Selective cancellation and amplification of interaction parameters is, I suggest, the key to emergence. Higher order relationships are what I would call stochastic dispositional properties. So all the things that we look at and seem to be emergent, for Deacon, are just like bootstrapped. They're amplification processes that just happen. I'll see if I can find it. He has, again, like Gulick, he has these 3 different levels. And it starts out as being just stupid physical patterning. But then sometimes, when a spontaneous, self-organizing feature occurs because of some kind of stupid physical dynamic, part of the time, those can amplify far enough to move up to level 2, and then level 3 is like, life or whatever, the negentropic open systems, like the Prigozhin, whatever he called his, I don't remember what they were called. But, you're taking in energy and information and material in order to maintain your non-equilibrium state, and then giving off heat or whatever, But that all of that is just built up in this kind of ladder. Deacon's has an analogy that I think is similar to Campbell's ants. We'll see if to what extent this does anything for you or not.
It better include critters.
It kind of does. It includes the inside.
Well, I'm only interested in biology.
The interior of critters.
Okay.
Quote, any of the components of an organism, say a hemoglobin molecule, can be given an arbitrarily complete and precise description in the language of atomic physics or chemistry. Yet, this description will miss something that is nevertheless materially relevant to its structure and its very existence. Right, so the first part, I think, uncontroversial, but then when he wants to claim that, the thing that it's going to miss and is all of a sudden relevant to its existence, that's where it would get the emergence part and the controversy. Specifically, it will provide no hint of why this highly improbable molecular configuration is so prevalent, compared to the astronomical number of molecular forms that are not present. So I'm saying the highly improbable molecular configuration is analogous to the pincer, right? There's a whole lot of ways that those proteins could be distributed in the region, but they happen to be in pincer shape a lot, like, 1,000 times in our region or whatever. Deacon says, every atom in a hemoglobin molecule has a determined physical history. What I would call the trajectory of the atoms in the region. Specific converging tributaries of pushes from one molecular event to another over vast stretches of time help to determine how each of the thousands of atoms came together to form any given hemoglobin molecule. But this is almost irrelevant. The more important causal story is told by what is not around, what did not end up as part of the molecule. Hemoglobin's existence must be seen against a backdrop of vastly more numerous molecular forms that were eliminated via natural selection. Almost every feature that biologists find interesting about hemoglobin has to do with how it fits with other things in the living context. So, to me, that's the same thing as Campbell, but using hemoglobin instead of pincers. What do you think about that extended quote?
Well, I mean, I get the idea that the hemoglobin molecule is is present and all the other configurations are not, and that one explanation for why that is could be natural selection or something like that. So what is it that I need to go back or something about I'm missing something. So do I understand? Is my rephrasing on par with what he's saying? That I do understand what he's saying about the configurations?
Yeah, what you just said sounded fine to me.
Okay. So I'm trying to understand. Yeah.
Yeah, if I didn't say enough to drill home the point, to continue with what I had highlighted. One of the problems with the articles I like is that I end up highlighting too much of them. Okay, but he also said,
right. You're like the whole thing's highlighted at the end.
This fit was not created by the push of specific antecedent molecular events, but by the evolutionary canceling dynamic of natural selection that pushed alternative forms out of existence. Hemoglobin occupies the space of possibilities that was left. So if we forget, try to play the reductionist game. Eliminate the body, the hemoglobin, the everything, and just look at the atoms in their distribution. In that case, it's like a gas in a box or whatever. They could be in a vast, indefinite number of different locations. Most of them are arbitrarily and evenly distributed amongst the available space, so that you release a gas, you squirt it in through a hole into a box, and pretty soon it's not going to be concentrated near your insertion hole anymore, but evenly distributed throughout the available space. That's how the atoms could be in our region of space around your body or whatever, but they're not. They're all inside your body. Well, not even that. They're inside your arteries and veins or wherever the hemoglobin is. And not only that, they're in a very particular and patterned shape within inside of that. As far as the reductionists, the fundamentalists, the physicists are concerned, there's nothing special about the shape that we call hemoglobin, that the biologist calls hemoglobin, but yet we see it. So that's the burden shifting or whatever. It's like, physicists, tell me how the fuck this happened. Why do we see all of this? We have an answer, because natural selection works. And the alternative shapes for arranging hemoglobin are less fitness enhancing than this one. Some were tried, some weren't tried, but they were eliminated. And this is where we are right now, for a biological evolutionary reason that cannot be expressed in atomic terms. I think is the point that a Deacon or a Campbell would make.
Yeah, and it's funny because Deacon just does he use anything other than natural selection as the force at the top level or whatever? Because I would say Campbell uses many, compared to, not many, but he uses more. And he uses natural selection as one of them.
Yeah. I think in the hemoglobin section it's natural selection, but he also does lots of other things. He's in this article is one place where he does like snowflakes, and he does all kinds of different stuff as examples of taking advantage of these affordances, of these open spaces.
Okay, now here's a question I have. What is the affordance open space for the hemoglobin molecule?
The region of fitness, like non-lethal arrangements of, I don't know enough about the details to even know the terms,
But just okay. All right. I think I have a sense for it.
A bunch of them, like you could arrange these, I don't know, platelets, what even makes up a hemoglobin thing? The molecules or whatever. There's all these arrangements that would just, you'd die instantly or whatever. Well, those are eliminated by this higher level thing called natural selection. There are other ones that are not immediately lethal, but are suboptimal compared to this one.
Right. Yeah, they'd be suboptimal. Yeah.
And so that I think the history of your lineage in natural selection is kind of the edges of your picture, right? The outside of the picture is like instant death. Like it's just most of the air in the whole atmosphere, like, okay, yep, that's all crap. And then we have this little range that's the boundary of the picture, which I think are maybe the ones that were tried but aren't great. And then the affordance would be the available shapes inside that won't kill you but are, so they're accessible,
relatively efficient.
All right, well, again, I suck at the fucking detail. Like, if it's carbon-based, okay, well, there's only so many ways you can attach other molecules to a carbon atom. Or other, you can only arrange it in so many ways. So that eliminates some. So that's kind of, as we're at the pottery wheel making our pitcher, that's part of what shapes it. Oh, well, there's the rules of attaching things to carbon. And, and then there's the history of our lineage, and that and that's what forms the shape of our. Space.
Yeah, I mean that's just another good example, I suppose, of things happening at one level that determine, say, the distribution or the frequency of things at another. Yeah, no, I remember there's a few other things I wanted to say. And I don't know how much they pushed the conversation along, but there was the, I think I'm familiar with that article. Either maybe you gave it to me or I don't know. And then I know the incomplete nature thing. And when I looked into the incomplete nature, and I may have talked to you about this before, but apparently like there are people who feel like he's like plagiarized them and stuff like that. So there's a couple other like philosophers out there who've written books or whatever. And I don't get the sense that I just get the sense that he didn't cite them and has kind of gone and taken their stuff and gone much further or something like that. I just had to mention that for some reason. I don't know why, but
don't give ear to those slanders. I don't know. I know nothing about it. Maybe he faked the whole fucking thing. I don't care about the
No. I don't think you could fake
this.
Ideas. Yeah, exactly. But the ideas, I guess I am somewhat familiar with it, and I think, yeah, I think I get it. I don't think you need it though. To, you know what I mean? Like I think it's great, but I don't think if the purpose is how are we going to go about explaining this? I mean, I think it's just a step beyond. What he does is say, here's this additional way of looking at it. But I don't think I don't think that he and Campbell are doing anything different.
Well,
where
obviously
I don't
I'm
see
not
how
doing it justice right now, but I don't see how Campbell is addressing the affordance issue or the constitutive absence issue in any way at all.
No, right. I mean, that's, I think the whole point. That's what, Deacon's clearly bringing to the table. But does the I think maybe what you're saying to me is that the absence is what helps you come back from Pepper or something. Is that right?
Not necessarily. They just happened to come in that order tonight.
Right. Okay. Huh. Well, I don't know. I mean, to me, sounds like more, you know, I don't know. I'm not profoundly impacted by it. I definitely get it and I like it. I don't dislike it, but it is just like another way of talking about it. But maybe I need to go back and read it myself in more detail and learn to appreciate it more. Damn it.
The Campbell is, straight to the point. It's like 2 pages or whatever. And the Deacon one is more like 50 pages and convoluted and a lot of content.
Word salad.
Yeah, I still am in the position that I've been in for a few years. And I guess I haven't found others who are there, and I don't know why. I think it's because people don't appreciate reductionism, even the reductionists.
No, I don't
But
know. But
reductionism is still where it's at, and if I guess if I had to today put my life on something or put my money down, I might even go reductionist. But when my hunches and where I put my effort is to attempt to develop emergence, because I still have intense suspicions that will ultimately win the day, though I don't know that it does in August 2018. For me, it's not nearly as simple as saying, yeah, I read Campbell win, boom, like, no shit, like, move on. I like it, and I think it's impactful, but this is an issue where I can see both sides, which is not usually the case.
right. Yeah. For me, it's if I had to decide on anything, it would definitely include us and what we do, and if that has any bearing on the scenario. If it does, then everything is kind of suspect, and that's sort of the. But maybe that's I'm glancing too hard into the epistemological abyss.
Well, to me, it's not at all clear that we exist.
Huh? To you, it's not at all clear that we exist?
Right.
Well,
and with the way I interpret reductionism or whatever, I think that the reductionist ought to claim that we simply, human beings don't exist. That's like, I've already told you, I'm a reductionist. What exists are atoms. Are human beings atoms? Nope. Well, they don't exist. Like, I think that's what they should say, and they could easily be right.
I don't think they could easily be right. I don't think easily is the right word for that. They could be right, but they are the ones that have a much more difficult task ahead of them, I think.
I think not. I think the burden is always on the positive for me. So if you want to add more stuff to the very simple claim, there's only atoms following the laws of physics, then it's your job to do it.
This is what I would say. This is how I'm looking at it right now. There's a middle, and you are now subtracting things or you're adding things, and either way is a burden. You have to explain to me why you can subtract things from the stories we tell, how you can get just a subtraction of language and all that. And you also have to explain to me how you can get language in the emergent pattern. Like, I don't know if any of these things are, I think they can just all be canceled out by just us talking and stuff like that. Just like the idea that we just talk and we construct these stories and this is how we think. And that to me seems to be the biggest issue. So going in either direction is a problem. I think so far the emergentists have done a much better job at handling it than the reductionists, who seem to basically just do one big leg sweep. And somehow you're enamored by that. Everything you said in support of that to me so far is just goalpost moving, and it doesn't. You haven't done anything in the, in my opinion, for the case of reductionism. And yet you've also brought up more, like Deacon and other, like, it just seems like, oh, well, all right. So I don't know where reductionism actually works. And I know you say that people don't appreciate it, but I think you appreciate it too much. And I'm not sure why you appreciate it so much. Because I don't think I'm incapable of trying to imagine what the reductionist is doing. But I think I think the most sure-handed thing we have is just the way we talk about the world that I think we're looking at.
To continue using this spatial metaphor, what to you is this middle? What I heard you just saying is kind of like, well, there's a location in which we are all standing, and emergentism is off to the left and reductionism is to the right, and they both have a job of pulling me in their direction. I don't see it that way. What is the middle to you?
I think the middle is just us, like you and me right now talking. That's the middle. And then everything we do from that communicative, system is to elaborate on the world and what it contains and what it's about. At least that's where I'm at right now. So one of the ways we try and talk about how things come to be is using the emergence and downward causation way of talking about it. Another way is to say it's all just fundamental particles or whatever. But both cases include other things we've learned about ourselves, which is that we like to split things up, we like to combine things, and those all produce hierarchies, and we see it when we examine our own language. Like I'm repeating myself now from earlier. We see it when we examine our own tools and techniques, and we see it when we examine our stories for how things exist. And so to me, that's the middle, is just the way we operate. And we go around and we do our thing, and everything seems to have that same damn flavor. And so at the moment, the one to me that seems to have a better handle on the situation are the emergentists, because they, to me, seem to include that core aspect of what's going on, which is you and me talking. I have no way to say, if you want it to be all just, reductionist shit, I don't know. Okay. I don't, you show me, like, where can we go to do this? I mean, other people have a much easier time, seems to me anyway, saying like, here, let's go over here and I'll show you how the pattern looks and how it seems to operate. But, I don't know. That to me seems where I'm at the moment.
That sounds to me like another good discussion. Like, tonight we were talking a lot about the metaphysical fundamentals. This is kind of like the epistemological or rhetorical fundamentals or something. Where do we stand? What's our vantage point from which we discuss alternatives, and then using that to help determine burdens and what are we going to demand of people who make various claims, etc. That's an interesting topic for another day.
I'm like, all right, well, that was how I ended this. That was my position.
Yeah, I'm ready to end this, but that was a good one. I liked this one.
Yeah, this one is thought-provoking, or whatever. Yeah, this is. I hope we did this justice. That's my biggest one, because when you look at the literature, when I was looking at various things, I couldn't dive as deep as I wanted. I was like, oh fuck. How are we gonna do this?
No, it's
but
huge.
You helped.
And, hopefully, if we exist long enough doing this, we'll revisit it. But there's a lot of other topics, and there's too much to know. And whoever was listening to this while they read dishes or mowed the lawn has finished long ago and turned it off.
So,
anyway, we'll do more another time. Hope justice has been served.
Serving up some serious justice. All right.
Boop, boop, ba-doop. End.